Good morning. Good morning, brother. Jerry's telling me it's time to go, so we're going to go. I'm staying with him, so I want him to cook me breakfast in the morning. So I don't want to be on his bad side. It's good to be with you this morning. My name's Chant Parker. We're here with my two fellow classmates, Bryce and Cole, from the Bear Valley Bible Institute. Originally from Texas, but up in Colorado right now hopefully learning how to preach the word.
We allow Texans in here, so
Yeah. All right. But excited to be here, excited to be able to share in this week with you guys and hopefully learn some things as we go. This morning, our class is going to be focused on a faithful church, and you'll see throughout the week this faithful theme that we're going to be going towards. During our sermon this morning, we're going to talk about a faithful God. But if you would turn to 1 Timothy 5, and that's going to be where we're going to take our class from, regarding a faithful church. 1 Timothy chapter 5. And we're just going to go through the entire chapter as best as possible. And I heard y'all like to talk, so hopefully we'll have some good opportunity for you to talk as well. Just as we begin, some general information about 1 Timothy. There's a couple of different statements in 1 Timothy that give us an idea of what Paul is writing about to Timothy. Particularly in 1 Timothy 3, chapter 3, verse 15, he says, "But in case I am delayed, I write so that you will know how one ought to conduct himself in the household of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and the support of the truth." And so it's really nice when the writers tell us why they're writing. And so Paul is saying, I'm writing to you so you know how you can conduct yourself in the house of God. So you know how you can be a faithful church and faithful Christians in the household of God. And so we're going to take that theme of this book of First Timothy and look particularly at chapter 5 at 4 different relationships that Paul describes on how we can have a faithful church, how we can protect the truth, and continue in faithfulness in our relationships among the brethren, among the widows, the elders, and our employers. So we're going to break those apart, and we're going to go through and look at each section of relationships individually. Then we'll have some discussion application questions, and then move on to the next section of relationships as we go. So the first one we see is the verses 1 and 2 of chapter 5. If somebody would like to read chapter 5, verse 1 and 2, please.
Rebuke not an elder, but entreat him as a father, and the younger men as brethren. This is the first verse.
Verse 2 as well, please.
The older women as mothers, the younger as sisters with all purity.
So in this, we see the relationship just among the brethren. We see the older to the younger. We see this relationships as fathers and mothers. Elder in this context is more just the older man. The older man to the younger man, the older women to the younger women, but also brothers and sisters in Christ. That terminology, that familial terms that we see, we would describe the church as in our regular language. But we see this relationship. We're not to rebuke the older man, but to exhort him as you would your parent, respect them and encourage them. The younger ones were to treat with equally, and not with the attitude of I'm better than you, I'm superior than you, but this family relationship that we have among the brethren is described in this particular context. So with each of these different relationships, we're going to look at, I guess, 3 different things. The results, what happens if we do this? What happens if we don't do this? And then we'll look at how we can actually make sure that we are practicing these things in the church. So the first thing is, what is the result of treating each other this way? Maybe you have some personal examples. Maybe from your experience, if we treat each other with respect and we treat each other as family, then this will be the result of that. What are your thoughts on that?
You have a church like this.
You have a church like this. Well, I'm learning that. Last night the cookout was great, and I met I think almost every one of you, and that's not as common in some places. And met some zebras along the way. What else might we get out of these types of relationships in the church?
We learn about needs of others.
Absolutely.
Provide the opportunity to serve, as well as learning how to allow others to serve you.
Absolutely. You can't know how to support each other if you're not with each other and treating each other as family. Roger?
Based on this foundational truth, we develop the relationships and we become united.
Absolutely. And I think that's a big deal, because you see churches that don't have that family relationship. They don't treat each other like they should, and they're not united, they're divided. And sometimes it leads to fractions in the church. What else might come out of treating each other in this family type way?
We show how much we love one another as God has commanded.
Absolutely. We practice in our daily lives and our conduct what we read in Scripture to love one another. I guess go ahead.
I look at the word rebuke. Do not sharply rebuke, but
Mhm.
rather appeal to him. So we are still supposed to exhort one another. We're still supposed to, when we recognize that something is not quite right, but you don't sharply do it. You go to somebody as a father,
Right.
or you go to somebody as a brother. And then the last part of 2, in all purity. It's not just to be right. It's not to lord it over them, but it is because you want them to be right in the word. So it's
Absolutely.
heart.
And you see that portrayed in God as the perfect Father. And we'll talk about that a little bit in our sermon this morning. But God is the same way. God cannot be just if he's not both good and severe. If he doesn't administer consequence to disobedience as well as love and kindness to obedience. Absolutely. So on the other side, so we see the result of the positive side of doing this as we should. What if we don't do this? And some of it will be maybe in this is the opposite way, but what may be some repercussions if we're not treating each other as a family, if we're not treating each other in the way that we see described in verses 1 and 2?
We won't have that unity.
We won't have unity.
Hurt feelings, and then division and factions are created.
Absolutely. What else might you think?
Jesus said in John 13:35 that it is by the love we have for one another we give evidence to the world of our discipleship. you subtract the love,
Hmm.
what does that do to the witness that we have for the world?
Absolutely. We become unappealing to the world if we're not treating each other the way that Christ has commanded us to, that we see in Scripture. Yes, sir.
We're not as effective as a body as well.
Absolutely.
We're not working together. You know, we see in scripture where strength and the ability to do more comes from being together and working together rather than separate, isolated.
Right. And you see in 1 Corinthians and also Romans where it talks about the body, the church body being like your physical body, and you have different parts like your hands and your feet and all the different parts of your body that work together as a whole to make a unit, and everybody has different talents that they can bring to the church. But if you're operating without a foot because you have this division among yourselves, well, then you're disabled as a church body. Absolutely. You may even find yourself having disrespect among generations. Maybe it's the younger to the older, and they're not treating each other in this way that we see in verses 1 and 2. And so the generations are not united, but they may be creating those divisions among themselves as well. So what are some ways that we can practically ensure that we're treating each other in these ways? What can we do in our daily lives that can establish these practices and build better relationships among the brethren?
Swallow our pride.
Okay.
If you look at what's going on here, there has to be humility from both sides.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one side's prideful. It's difficult to take correction.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when we're working together and being united, that only works when we're humble.
Yeah.
And we're able to focus on the unity we have in Christ and be willing to take instruction or correction or encouragement, whatever way that is, and not hold ourselves as a higher, not able to be corrected.
Sure. It's hard to do things in all purity at the end of verse 2 if we're prideful. What else might we do in a practical way to make sure that we are having these relationships in the church?
We have to be together.
Yeah, absolutely.
So being faithful in attendance is part of it.
Right. You can't know the church body or the needs of the church body if you're not with the church party.
Visiting in the homes is a good way to know each other, and as far as I see, everybody here is welcoming you into their home if you want to come. You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other thoughts?
Praying one for another.
Absolutely. And sometimes we discredit the power of prayer, or we think that's the last resort, but it's one of the most powerful things we can do. Yes, ma'am.
Engaging one another. I mean, when you come to worship, come to Bible study, to talk to one another and seek each other out and talk. And this is your family. And
Right.
you come to see this family and you don't get to see them every day. So it should be a pleasure and a privilege.
Yes, ma'am. Do you have something?
When we do have disagreements, Jesus explained in the 18th chapter of Matthew that we settle this in a direct and personal way.
Right.
The ways of the world we set aside, where people talk behind the back of others. We settle this in the manner that Jesus described,
Absolutely.
keeping the love intact.
And if we treat each other this way, then we're going to want to adhere to the inspired directions that we have on, conflict. We're going to want to adhere to the love that we're supposed to have for the brethren, but also the correction when necessary. And we're going to want to do everything with the right hearts without the pride that we've been talking about. The next section we see is concerning widows. And it's a longer section. We'll read verses 3 through 16 and then break it apart in a similar way, go through the text, try to explain the different types of widows that are described, and then go through the same set of questions to talk about how we can properly treat our widows and make sure that we're a faithful church in that particular way. We can break it up, or if somebody wants to read 3 through 16 all together, you're welcome to. Go for it.
Honor widows who are truly widows, but if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. She who is truly a widow, left all alone, has set her hope on God and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. She who is self-indulgent is dead even while she lives. Command these things as well, so that they may be without reproach. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Let a widow be enrolled if she is not less than 60 years of age, having been the wife of one husband, and having a reputation for good works. If she has brought up children, has shown hospitality, has washed the feet of the saints, has cared for the afflicted, and has devoted herself to every good work, but refused to enroll younger widows, for when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry, and so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. Besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not. So I would have younger widows marry their children, manage their households, and give the adversary no occasion for slander. For some have already strayed after Satan. If any believing woman has relatives who are widows, let her care for them, let the church not be burdened, so that it may care for those who are truly widows.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we see in this section, the topic is, of course, widows, and that's consistent throughout. But there's the distinction between those who are widows indeed, those who are truly widows, and those who are not. And then we see kind of some variations within that as well. So there's four different, we'll say, breakdowns of widows. You have the widows that are truly indeed, the ones that are real widows, and there's certain qualifications that are described in the text. There's those who are widows that have family that can take care of them, so they're not in need of the support of financial or material things of the church in that case. You have the undeserving widows, the ones that maybe have left the church or that aren't practicing their Christianity, are not faithful. And then you have the young widows who we'll look at, who are encouraged to remarry, to go through the different things that are described in the text as well. So it's not just an easy like verses 1-7 through 8 or this and this next section. It's all mixed together. So we'll do our best to break it down and then talk about how we can make sure that we're applying this as a faithful church. So the real widows, or the widows indeed, are those that are to be honored. They're those that are to be relieved as well. And this has the idea of maybe a financial support, material support, as well as just the respect and honor that should be given to them for their service in the church, for them, growing up their children if they had them. And so there's this twofold idea of both financial, but also more of the honoring and respect that goes with them. They're described in verse 5 as those that are left alone. They don't have any children or grandchildren that are able to take care of them, able to support them, or provide for them. They are those that trust in God. They continue in prayer night and day in verse 5, as if they're waiting for salvation with joy and confidence. My grandmother just passed this last December, but she would always talk in this way. And she was one that would talk about prayer, and she was just like, well, I'm just waiting for my time. And she had a heart attack the day after I talked to her, and she was ready. She was ready to go on to her home, and she had the confidence that we see kind of talked about here. She's a woman in verse 9 that's older than 60. She's younger than 60. She's not to be put on the list. So if you're over 60, then the Bible calls you old. But that's just a fun fact that you can take with you. I'm not quite there, but one day. I think Harvey's been there twice. But they're widowed from a scriptural marriage in verse 9, and they have a reputation of good works. So these are what the descriptions of a widow indeed, those who are truly widows, who would require the material, but also the honor and respect of the church. Not that the church is not allowed to support other widows, but this is a particular distinction that we see in the text here. And those that have widows that have family, those are the ones that have grandchildren or children that are still around. They're able to support and encourage. And it's an expectation that the family does take care of their mother or grandmother who is a widow. This taking care of their family is considered good and acceptable in verse 4. It proves the genuineness of their faith. If you're not taking care of your mother or grandmother who's a widow, then your faith is not genuine, as described here in verse 8. And it unburdens the church so they can support those who are widows indeed. If children and grandchildren are taking care of their mothers or grandmothers that are widows, then the church is not having to put financial means into and material support for those particular widows because the system that should be there with their family is working as it should. And then there's the undeserving widows in verses 6 and 7. And those are the ones that are not to be treated with reverence or as the real widows were because they don't devote themselves to God, but they devote themselves to their own pleasure. They're not serving God, they're serving themselves. They're immoral, they're dead spiritually. And so there's a distinction between the real widows and these widows who are not serving God in an appropriate way. Then the last category is those widows who are young widows. They're under the age of 60. So again, if you're under the age of 60, congratulations. They're encouraged to remarry, raise a family, and they manage their home. It says that at times they may have divided loyalties and they may be seeking their own pleasures. And so they're encouraged to remarry, but in an appropriate way, so they can continue in the support. They're not having to rely on the support of the church again because they have done that. So in a similar way, what would be the result of treating widows this way? If maybe let's narrow it down to the widows that are described as widows indeed or true widows. If we're treating them with respect and honor, but we're also taking care of them financially if they have need, what would be the result of this?
A church full of old ladies.
A church full of old ladies. All right.
I just wanted to point out that the word honor is used other places.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus in Mark 7 talked about how you're to honor your father and mother.
Absolutely.
And it means, it even means support them and not put aside the commandment of God by saying whatever I would have given to you is Corban or given a gift to God.
Mm-hmm.
So even in Ephesians 6, when he says honor your father and mother, then normally fathers and mothers should be sufficient as their age, but sometimes in their agedness they may need support, help with their food or
Sure.
something like that. But there needs to be there is in a real support, not just with words.
Absolutely. What other things may come out of treating widows properly as a faithful church?
Well, this is actually a continuation of family.
Absolutely.
This is what, instead of their own physical, biological family, it is the church
Right.
who's stepping in that place as their family. And so honoring, supporting, as Dan said, financially,
Mm-hmm.
mentally, socially.
Absolutely.
Assisting them, that's what family does. That's what family does. And so that's part of God's family.
This is James 1:27, pure religion and undefiled.
Absolutely. I think, if I were in the situation that I passed and my wife is over the age of 60, and that's going to be a long time from now, but it would give me confidence as a younger person in the generation to see the church faithfully practicing this. It would give me confidence that if I were in this situation and, our kids and grandkids or whatever it may be, they're not around. And if I'm confident that the church that we're a part of is going to take care of my wife, gives that confidence both internally, but maybe to those outside in the world as well. They'll see, okay, well, they take care of their members. They take care of their widows. I want to be a part of that congregation. What would be maybe the opposite side of that, the repercussions of not practicing this? Yes, ma'am.
Sometimes we see widows that have family, but they will not take care of them.
Sure.
And they are Christians, but perhaps most of their family is not.
Right.
Is not Christians, and so they don't pay any attention to them or anything or support them in any way. And then the church steps in and helps in that case too.
Absolutely. And it may, you may have widows that are discouraged if we're not practicing this. We may have widows that fall through the cracks and end up, start slowly losing their confidence or not being able to come around or not being as involved because they're not supported or encouraged.
Did everyone get a handout?
Entirely my fault, and I apologize.
That guy.
I wonder if we cease to become the church and continue to be the Church of Christ, if we aren't in adherence to these passages, and especially this one. And John mentioned James 1.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously very important. God has made it important and stressed it. And so if we're not practicing it, we better change the name on the door.
Absolutely. We can't call ourselves a faithful church, as we're emphasizing this morning, if we're not practicing these things that are described. What are some ways? Go ahead.
I think we have to be clever these days, though, because the money might not be the basic thing that the church
Right.
needs to provide, because there's Social Security and
Sure.
there's income that might come, and but the moral support, the emotional support, the part of the family support
Right.
is most important.
Absolutely.
And they need to belong instead of, she doesn't need any help because she's got this
Right.
this money. Money isn't the answer to hardly anything, actually.
Sure. Especially in our culture today. It may have been a different circumstance for the people in the time of First Timothy, but for us, absolutely. And that may extend as well, not just to widows, but to our shut-ins and things like that, where we need to make sure we're providing that emotional and physical support in that way as well.
Well, I don't want to, we are talking about actual support, feeding the widows, like
Sure.
in Acts. Here, he's making a distinction between who the church is going to support and who it's not going to support.
Right.
And he says, if she has family, let them take care of her.
Yes,
They
sir.
need to provide for her. And if he doesn't, or if the younger family doesn't support her, then they're worse than an unbeliever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just emotional and, social. This is talking about who the church is going to put on the widow and need list and actually support, make sure that she's fed, that she is not without.
Right. And it's a further distinction because verses 1 and 2 still apply to widows. They still apply to the family relationship and how we should treat each other in that more emotional and just mental support. But then, as we're mentioning, this next section is particularly who is to be supported materially, financially by the church and who is not. So great distinction there. What would be some ways that we could practice this and make sure that we're treating our widows in this way?
You need to know who your widows are. I know, especially larger congregations, people get caught up in the people they know, and sometimes the widow, however long, ends up getting forgotten, or she gets, because she can't come as much, or for whatever reason, she kind of gets put down on the list, and people don't pay as much attention to who's on it.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the most important things. If you don't know your widows, you have to know them before you can support them. Anything else?
Church is also good about taking care of their needs, like anything that needs done around their home, mowing the lawn, or
Absolutely.
anything like that. We have a list back here, and I know that the guys are all good about that.
Yes, sir.
Just the nature of our business, we wind up probably 30% of our business is widows. So one of the things that we discovered is they may go weeks or months without a phone call if their family's disconnected. Your birthday cards, I have widows that weren't even getting birthday cards, so we make sure they get a birthday card, they get a phone call at least, every couple of weeks.
Sure.
And we start doing flowers on their birthday. I have some widows that's the only thing they get,
Wow.
year, that maybe their family's passed or they're disconnected or whatever. Just a huge benefit. So you just have to love them. I mean, people in general, you want to love them, care for them, and just make sure that they're special.
Absolutely. And that goes into the idea of honoring the widows, respecting them, and encouraging them, as it says in verse 3. Similar things to what we talked about for just the brethren, praying for them, praying with them, just talking to them and being a friend to them. There was a 90-something-year-old widow when I was in college, and she lived with her daughter, and her daughter was taking care of her as she should have been, but she never really was given time by anybody just to talk to. And so I would start talking to her, and we would be at the church building for an extra 30 minutes because she just had so much life to share, so much experience to share. And that was a very small thing that I could have done, but something that made, and her daughter mentioned, it really encourages her just to be able to talk about her life to somebody. So just being that person that is willing to give them time in that way. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next section. It's a faithful church properly treats their elders. This is from verses 17 through 25. It says, the elders who rule well are to be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. For the scripture says, you shall not muzzle the ox while he is threshing, and the laborer is worthy of his wages. Do not receive an accusation against an elder except on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. Those who continue in sin rebuke in the presence of all, so that the rest will also be fearful of sinning. I solemnly charge you in the presence of his chosen angel, in the presence of God and Jesus Christ and of his chosen angels, to maintain these principles without bias, doing nothing in a spirit of partiality. Do not lay hands upon anyone too hastily, and thereby share responsibility for their sins, the sins of others. Keep yourself free from sin. No longer drink water exclusively, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and your frequent ailments. The sins of some men are quite evident, going before them to judgment. For others, their sins follow after. Likewise, also, deeds that are good are quite evident, and those which are otherwise cannot be concealed. So in this section, we see 3 different ways or 3 different responsibilities that we have to our elders. The first is to show honor, and this is a similar concept that we saw to our widows, as well as the concepts that we talked about with our brethren. To show honor to them, we're supposed to have high regard for them because of their labor in word and doctrine. This is manifest by not receiving accusations against them without a plurality of witnesses. Somebody's just complaining about their elders, and they just have nothing positive to say about them, but there's not actually any evidence of it, and there's not a plurality of witnesses, similar to what we talked about in conflict with Matthew 18, having that the structure of addressing conflict there. We're not to receive those accusations against them without verification of that. The second thing we see in regard to elders is rebuking them when necessary. This is, again, there has to be sin that was established. It can't just be a blind accusation that's happening without any particular witness or evidence. But when necessary, there's this public correction that is described, and it's one for the correction, but also to produce fear among the church body of, we need to make sure that we're living in righteousness and correct and obedience to God, and doing what we need to as Christians to be able to live out our lives. I think this wasn't particularly in this situation, but there was one elder back at our home congregation in Texas that his conscience was having a hard time with a situation that he didn't sin in, but he didn't feel like he handled it appropriately, and he came before the congregation and asked for prayers. It had been weighing on him, and just to see that from one of our elders was something that was very impactful, and I think had a positive impact on, okay, well, we're all human, we all make mistakes, but that's how we should handle it. We should handle it by acknowledging it with our brothers and sisters. We should handle it in a way that we can move forward and have the support and encouragement and prayers. And it was an impactful moment for myself growing up in the church to see that exemplified in that way. The third thing we see is approving men to serve as elders. And Paul is telling Timothy not to do it so hastily. The idea of laying hands on someone is to show approval. And so if I lay my hands on you and I'm showing approval for you, and I think that you're a great guy, but if you do that too hastily, you may not know the person very well. You may not know that maybe the negative things that they have in their lives, or you may see the face that they put on at church, but their weekly activities don't mirror what you want as an elder. And so don't do that too hastily, as to have somebody that may have hidden sins that aren't apparent, that you wouldn't want to be in that leadership position. What would be the result of honoring our elders and treating them with respect, as we see described in these verses?
I would just add, because he says, again, this is in the context of honoring and double honor. Mm-hmm. And he says, he zeroes in on the laborer is worthy of his wages, and the scripture says, don't muzzle the ox.
Absolutely.
He's again talking about that if he's in need, I mean, every elder is not wealthy and set. They can have a lifetime of wisdom and be an elder, but not financially well off.
Sure.
And he says, especially the one that preaches is worthy of double honor. And you don't muzzle the ox. So here he's talking again in a financial sense. There is a time to support the elder, just as with the widow in need. And that's all I got to say.
Absolutely. There's the idea of support and honor and this relationship that you have with him, and the quote that we see that you should not muzzle an ox while he is threshing. If the ox is working and he's eating while he's working, well, let him do that because he's doing a good service for you. So let him continue to work and support him in his work because he's worthy of his wages. What else might come of treating our elders this way?
It's Hebrews 13:17, that it's clear that there's quite an accountability for elders. But one of the things that the writer says is that these responsibilities may be carried out with great joy.
Sure.
If the relationship with those in the flock is all that God desires.
Absolutely. And again, we started with just brethren in general, and our elders are still part of the brethren. So the relationship that we have with our brothers and sisters in Christ and our fathers and mothers in the church and sons and daughters in the church still apply to every one of these situations. We should treat them with respect as we would anybody else. We should have them in our homes. We should pray with them and pray for them. We should encourage them. They're not above the standard of member where we can't treat them in a way that we would treat anybody else because they need encouragement just as much as anybody else. What other things come to mind?
We need to hold them up because I'm looking at Titus chapter 1 here. Holding fast the faithful word as he has begun, as he has taught, that he may be able to stand for sound doctrine. That's to help us. That's to teach us. We need to love and respect them for this.
Absolutely. One of the other purposes that you can kind of see in 1 Timothy is in chapter 1, and he describes the writing to him so that they may be able to stand against false doctrine. So as a church, as a faithful church, you should be able to stand against false doctrine. And you can do that if you have faithful elders and you're supporting your elders and they're leading the congregation in a way that is appropriate. What would be the negative side of this? If we're not treating our elders appropriately, what could be some negative consequences of that?
You might find yourself with no elders.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you're abusing the eldership.
Right. And even if it's not in this generation, you may scare off all the other potential elders in the next generation where I don't want to be part of that because I saw how they treated my father as an elder. I saw how they treated, this other man as an elder. And so I don't want to aspire to be one because it doesn't seem like they're treated very well. Absolutely. What else might be a negative consequence?
So if there's no respect for the hierarchy that God set forth, ultimately there's going to be a crumbling from within.
Absolutely.
There has to be that.
Right. You're missing your foundation and you're going to have that division and disunity if you see that as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it really can cause division.
Absolutely.
Serious division. And, I think there are congregations that split over this issue by choosing sides.
Right.
And it's a terrible thing.
And you see that far too often. And God gives us the instructions on how to prevent those things, but we don't always adhere to them or follow them. How can we apply this? What are some practical ways that we can show our elders that we support them and encourage them and even financially help them if needed?
Well, we said prayer. So
Prayer, absolutely.
Pray for our elders.
And it's something to pray for them, but I think it's also encouraging to let them know, hey, I've been praying for you. I think it was Heidi, I believe, that told me and my family yesterday, hey, we've been praying for you coming out here. And I'm sure many of you have been doing that. But just to hear those words was just encouraging to know that we have family here that's been encouraged to see us and to have us with you. What other things?
positive. I mean, I think it was mentioned earlier that if you go to an elder or anybody and it's always negative, 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 that's gonna weigh. But if you go, I'm appreciative of this, I'm appreciative of that. If it's not just all negative speech in which you go to them, there's an encouragement, whether they're doing a good job or not. Hey, I'm appreciative of
Right.
the actions you're taking as so that.
Absolutely. Just being thankful in general for what they're doing. All right, in our last 5 minutes, we're going to read the first 2 verses of chapter 6 and talk about similar things. And this is the relationship maybe outside of the church, but with our employers or a master servant as described. In chapter 6, 1 and 2, it says, all who are under the yoke as slaves are to regard their own masters as worthy of all honor, so that the name of God and our doctrine will not be spoken against. Those who have believers as their masters must not be disrespectful to them because they are brethren, but must serve them all the more because those who partake of the benefit are believers and beloved. Teach and preach these principles. So you see, this is kind of a good close to the section. It's still in the context of honoring. It's still in the context that we've been talking about. So we're going to squeeze it into chapter 5 and pretend it's part of it. But this idea of treating our employers or treating the master servant as described here, but employers in maybe modern day language, with respect and honor, similar to the other relationships. We appreciate them rather than despise them. We loyally serve them as Christians rather than unfaithfully serving them. And this maybe gets into how we can impact the world, but what is the result of treating our employers this way?
Well, if you're an outstanding worker, they take notice and they become curious as to why you're being such a good worker.
Absolutely. And it may not even just impact your employer, but your fellow employees. And I know Cole has some personal experience with that. What other ways may it impact us or impact other people if we're treating our employers this way?
Joseph comes to mind. In his faithful service, God used him powerfully.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
I think it's important in the context of Paul's writings as a whole. He talks on this relationship a lot and other letters as well. And it's not, you're not serving well only if you're being led well. It's unconditional.
Absolutely.
Whatever situation you find yourself in, whether you're the leader or the employee or whatever hierarchy we're always going to talk about, whatever position you're in, you're serving God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're answering to. And when you have that mindset, it's going to show through to whoever it is that you're doing that for.
Right. Absolutely. My brother was in a situation where he was asked to, we worked for the same company for an IT computer science coding type thing. And he was asked to take his manager's credentials because his manager was gone. He worked for the client, which was a healthcare company, and just take his credentials, log in and do what he needed to, and then, go about his day. And his manager was telling him to do this. That was on the project as well. And he said, I'm not comfortable with that because you're telling me to lie to the client and go about it in this way. And they're like, oh, really? And yeah, I'm not comfortable with that. And you can wait till the manager's gone or you can do it yourself, but I'm not going to be a part of that. And it was strange to the employer, but it was something that impacted them. They saw a piece of his character as a Christian, of what it looked like to, even if it's not against what they're wanting, to still honor your beliefs and your code of ethics based on what we see as faithful Christians. If we're not treating our employers this way, then what could be some negative consequences?
They're not seeing Christ in you.
They're not seeing Christ in you? Absolutely. We're not a light to the world. We're not showing them what a true Christian looks like. They're going to have no interest in being part of your church body because they don't see any benefit of being part of your church body. You're just like anybody else in their company. What are some ways in our last 30 seconds that we can apply this? What are some ways that we can make sure that we're showing honor to our employees or employers?
Colossians 3:22-24 says, obey all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service to men's pleasure, but in sincerity of heart, figuring God, and whatever you do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you receive the word from heaven.
Absolutely. It should be part of your character, not just a show of face. What were you going to say?
That was the verse that I was going to go.
Wow. Anything else as we close? Well, I appreciate it. Hopefully, as a faithful church, we can continue in treating our brethren in these ways, our widows, our elders, as well as our employers, and we can continue to be faithful in all that we do. Thank you so much.
We're filling out the